When a mysterious letter arrives criticizing his leadership of the Charlotte Hornets, Michael Jordan expects another armchair expert looking for attention. Instead, his visit to Memorial Hospital leads to an unexpected reunion with the one person who never held back the truth, even from the greatest basketball player of all time. As Jordan's competitive fire reignites and his struggling team begins a remarkable transformation, neither man realizes their connection runs deeper than basketball. This unlikely friendship is about to change everything, revealing a 30-year secret that will leave both men forever transformed. Michael Jordan stared out the window of his office in the Spectrum Center. His reflection stared back at him, older now, but still unmistakably the man once known as Air Jordan. Outside, Charlotte buzzed with life, but inside, Michael felt stuck. "Mr. Jordan, your 2 o'clock is here," his assistant called through the intercom. Michael sighed. Another meeting about ticket sales and sponsorships. This wasn't the kind of game he had dreamed of playing when he bought the Charlotte Hornets. "Send them in," he replied, straightening his custom suit and putting on his business smile. 3 hours later, Michael was on the golf course, his favorite escape these days. He lined up his putt, focusing with the same intensity that once made defenders crumble. The ball rolled smoothly into the hole. "Nice one, MJ!" his golf buddy Charles Barkley shouted from his cart. "Still got that killer instinct." Michael nodded, but the victory felt small. He missed the roar of 20,000 fans, the squeak of sneakers on hardwood, the weight of a championship on his shoulders. That evening, Michael sat alone in his home theater, watching game footage of his struggling Hornets team. They had talent, but lacked something he couldn't quite name. Heart? Focus? The will to be great? Whatever it was, Michael had possessed it in abundance as a player, but he couldn't seem to install it as an owner. "Something's gotta change," he muttered to himself, rewinding a particularly sloppy play for the third time. His phone buzzed with texts from coaches and managers, all looking for his approval on decisions that felt increasingly meaningless. Michael turned the phone face down. Tonight, he just wanted to think. The next morning, Michael arrived at his office early. He nodded to security guards and staff who still got starry-eyed around him, even after all these years. His assistant, Tracy, waited with his schedule and a stack of mail. "Busy day, Mr. Jordan," Tracy said, handing him his coffee. Black, no, sugar, just like he'd taken it since his playing days. 3 meetings about the New Jersey design, lunch with potential sponsors, and the scouting reports are on your desk. "Thanks, Tracy," Michael replied, taking the items from her. "Oh, and the fan mail team flagged this one," she added, placing a plain white envelope on top of the stack. "It came from Memorial Hospital. They thought you should see it yourself." Michael raised an eyebrow. The team usually handled his fan mail, only bringing him the occasional letter from a sick child that might warrant a personal visit or response. Alone in his office, Michael opened the envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat handwriting. "Mr. Jordan, your Hornets are playing without purpose. You've drafted athletes, not basketball players. You've hired yes men, not coaches. You're making the same mistakes as a team owner that you never would have tolerated as a player. Your last 3 draft picks show you're valuing flashover fundamentals. Your coaching staff lacks the courage to implement real discipline. And you, Mr. Jordan, appear more interested in your golf game than building a championship culture. Basketball deserves better from its greatest player. If you want to discuss real solutions, you know where to find me." Carter Michael read the letter twice, then a third time. Most people wouldn't dare speak to him this way. Who was this Carter? And why did the name sound vaguely familiar? Most surprising was Michael's own reaction. Instead of anger, he felt curious. The letter wasn't wrong. The writer clearly understood basketball and had been watching his Hornets closely. Michael buzzed Tracy on the intercom. "This letter from the hospital. Do we know anything more about it?" "Just that it came from Memorial. The return address is just the hospital's main address. Should I have someone look into it?" Michael tapped the letter against his desk, thinking. "No," he finally said, "but clear my calendar for tomorrow afternoon." "Sir? You have the budget meeting with—" "They can wait. I think I'm going to visit Memorial Hospital tomorrow. I'll set up the usual PR team and—" "No cameras, no PR," Michael interrupted. "Just me." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the letter, about the Hornets, about his life after basketball. Being the greatest player ever had been his identity for so long. Being a good team owner was proving much harder. He'd faced critics before, plenty of them. But something about this one felt different. Most critics just wanted attention. This one seemed to want something else, something more important. Michael Jordan, the man who never backed down from a challenge, made up his mind. Tomorrow, he would find this Carter and hear what they had to say. After all, even the greatest player in history could still learn a thing or two about the game he loved. Maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the shakeup he needed. Maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the shakeup he needed. As Michael drifted to sleep, his mind wandered back to Chicago, 1992. The Bulls had just won their second championship, and Michael was on top of the world. But even then, there had been a voice that kept him grounded. The memory came flooding back now, clear as day. And we're back with Sports Talk Chicago. I'm your host, Rick Talander, and we're taking your calls about last night's Bulls victory. Line 3, you're on the air. Thanks, Rick. This is Coach Carter. Michael turned up the radio in his Ferrari as he drove home from practice. That voice, deep, confident, and a little scratchy, had become both his most hated and most anticipated sound after games. Well, if it isn't our regular caller with the hot takes. What's your verdict on Jordan's 39-point performance last night, Coach? Michael braced himself. Most callers gushed about his dunks or game-winning shots. Not this guy. The points looked nice in the box score, but Jordan's defensive intensity dropped in the third quarter. He gambled for steals instead of staying in front of his man, and it cost them that 12-point lead. Michael frowned. He'd thought no one had noticed that. "That's harsh," the host replied. "The man just scored 39 points and got another ring." "I'm not saying he isn't great. He's the best player on the planet," Carter continued. "But greatness isn't about what you've done. It's about what you could still do better. Jordan could be the greatest defender in NBA history if he committed to it every minute he's on the floor. Right now, he's picking his spots." Michael hit his steering wheel. "Who does this guy think he is?" he muttered. But deep down, he knew Carter was right. He had eased up in the third quarter, thinking the game was in the bag. The next day at practice, Michael spent an extra hour on defensive drills. By the next season, he would win his first Defensive Player of the Year award. That had been the pattern for years. Michael would dominate, the city would celebrate, and then Carter would call in to point out what he could have done better. At first, the Bulls players had laughed about Jordan's personal critic. But over time, even his teammates noticed that Michael often addressed Carter's critiques in the very next game. "Man, it's like you heard that radio guy," Scottie Pippen once said after Michael had focused on setting up teammates rather than scoring. Michael had just shrugged. He'd never admitted to anyone that he listened to the show. Once, in 1996, after hearing Carter break down a flaw in his footwork, Michael had asked his security team to find out who the caller was, but Carter never left his number with the station, and the host protected his identity. Just a basketball junkie with strong opinions, the radio host had told Michael's security guy. Calls in from different places. Never wants attention. Just talks basketball. That made him different from every other critic Michael had known. Carter didn't want interviews or recognition. He just wanted the game played right. After Michael retired from the Bulls, the voice disappeared from the radio. And over time, with his Washington comeback, his second retirement, and eventually buying the Hornets, Michael had mostly forgotten about the mysterious radio caller who pushed him to be better. Until now. Michael woke up early the next morning with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. He dressed casually, jeans and a plain button-down shirt, hoping to attract less attention at the hospital. No security, no entourage. As he drove himself to Memorial Hospital, his mind kept spinning through possibilities. Could this letter writer really be the same Carter from the Chicago radio show all those years ago? The tone was similar, direct, knowledgeable, unimpressed by Michael's status. But what would a Chicago radio caller be doing in a Charlotte hospital? Michael pulled into the hospital parking lot and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He hadn't felt nervous meeting someone in years, but today his heart beat a little faster than normal. He took out the letter one more time and read it again. Basketball deserves better from its greatest player. The words stung because they echoed his own private thoughts. The Hornets were his team, his responsibility, and they were mediocre. Michael Jordan had never settled for mediocre as a player. Inside the hospital, Michael kept his head down, but it didn't help much. Even in regular clothes, he was still Michael Jordan, 6'6", and instantly recognizable to basketball fans. "Oh, my God, it's really you," the receptionist gasped. "Do you have an appointment?" "No appointment," Michael said with his practiced public smile. "I'm here to visit some kids, maybe brighten their day a little." This wasn't entirely untrue. Michael did visit children's hospitals regularly, though usually with more planning. "Of course! The children's ward would be thrilled," she said, already reaching for her phone. "Let me just call ahead." "Actually," Michael interrupted gently, "I'd prefer to keep it low-key. No announcements, if that's okay." The receptionist nodded, though she looked like she might burst from excitement. "There's one other thing," Michael added, lowering his voice. "I'm also looking for someone who might be a patient here. The name is Carter." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Carter? I don't think I can give out patient information." "I understand," Michael said. "I'm not asking for details. Just if you could point me toward where they might be." "It's important." The receptionist bit her lip, clearly torn between hospital policy and her desire to help Michael Jordan. "I really shouldn't," she began, but then her expression changed. "Wait, are you talking about Mr. Carter? 7th floor? Long-term care?" Michael's pulse quickened. "Could be. Older gentleman? Knows a lot about basketball?" The receptionist laughed. "That's him, all right. Watches every game. Complains about every game, too." Michael nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral despite the surge of excitement he felt. "Thank you," he said. "I'll visit the kids first, then maybe stop by to see Mr. Carter." As he walked toward the elevators, Michael felt like he was heading into Game 7 of the NBA Finals. After all these years, he might finally meet the voice that had pushed him to be even greater than he already was. As he walked toward the elevators, Michael felt like he was heading into Game 7 of the NBA Finals. After all these years, he might finally meet the voice that had pushed him to be even greater than he already was. The children's ward was on the 3rd floor. As soon as Michael stepped off the elevator, he could hear the beeping of machines mixed with cartoon sounds from TV sets. A nurse at the station looked up and froze mid-sentence on her phone call. "I'll call you back," she whispered into the phone before standing up. "Mr. Jordan, we weren't expecting... this is such an honor." Michael gave her his easy smile, the one he'd practiced through thousands of fan encounters. "I was hoping to visit with some of the kids, if that's okay." "Of course. The children will be absolutely thrilled," she said, already reaching for a visitor badge. "We just need you to sign in, and I'd prefer to keep this low-key," Michael said. "No photos for social media, if possible." The nurse nodded, understanding. "Some of our patients are well enough for visitors in the playroom. Others need to stay in their rooms. I can show you around." For the next hour, Michael moved from room to room. He signed basketballs, took selfies with kids, but asked them not to post until tomorrow, and answered the same questions he always got. "How tall? Are you really? Do you still play? Can you still dunk?" With each child, Michael was fully present. He'd learned long ago that these moments meant everything to the kids and their families. A 7-year-old named Tyler challenged him to a game of NBA Jam on his handheld gaming device. Michael laughed as his digital player got on fire and made impossible shots. "Just like the real thing," he joked, making Tyler giggle. In another room, a teenage girl named Jasmine was too shy to speak at first. But when Michael noticed her sketch pad had basketball drawings, he asked to see more. Her face lit up as she showed him her work. "You've got real talent," Michael told her. "The Hornets could use an artist like you for our program designs." Throughout the visit, Michael kept his promise to keep things quiet, but word spread through the hospital anyway. By the time he finished in the children's ward, a small crowd of staff had gathered near the nurses' station, pretending to be busy, with charts and computers. "Thank you for coming," the head nurse said. "It means so much to the kids." Michael nodded. "My pleasure. But before I go, I was hoping to visit someone in the long-term care unit." "A Mr. Carter?" The nurse's smile faltered, slightly. "Mr. Carter? Are you sure? Is there a problem?" No, she said quickly. "It's just, Mr. Carter isn't always the most welcoming to visitors. Even the staff sometimes." She trailed off, but Michael understood. Carter was difficult. Somehow, that didn't surprise him at all. "I'd still like to see him," Michael said. The nurse shrugged. "7th floor. But don't say I didn't warn you." As the elevator doors closed, Michael felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The letter in his pocket seemed to weigh more than it should. What if this wasn't the same Carter from the radio? What if it was just some random basketball fan with the same last name? The 7th floor was quieter than the children's ward. No cartoon sounds or excited voices, just the steady beep of monitors and the squeaking of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. At the nurses' station, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" For once, there was no flash of recognition in her eyes. Either she truly didn't recognize him, or she was too exhausted to care. "I'm looking for Mr. Carter's room," Michael said. The nurse raised an eyebrow. "Are you family?" "No, but I'm sorry, but Mr. Carter isn't accepting visitors except for family." Michael hadn't prepared for this. Usually, doors just opened for him. "It's important that I speak with him," Michael tried again. "My name is..." "I know who you are, Mr. Jordan," the nurse interrupted, her voice softening slightly. "Everyone knows who you are. But Mr. Carter has been very clear about his visitor policy." A younger nurse, who had been organizing medication nearby, leaned in. "Karen, maybe we could make an exception. It's Michael Jordan." The older nurse, Karen, seemed unmoved. "Rules are rules, Tanya, even for celebrities." Michael was about to. Try once more when a quiet voice spoke from behind him. He can come. Michael turned to see a petite nurse with silver-streaked black hair. She looked to be in her 50s and carried a small tray of medication. He's been watching you on TV since you were at North Carolina, the nurse said. He won't admit it, but he'd never forgive us if we turned you away. Karen sighed. Fine, but Sarah, you take him. And if Mr. Carter starts getting worked up, you bring Mr. Jordan right back out. His heart can't take excitement. Sarah nodded and gestured for Michael to follow her. As they walked down the long hallway, she spoke softly. Mr. Carter has been with us for almost 8 months now. Most patients in his condition don't last this long, but he's stubborn. What's wrong with him? Michael asked. Stage 4, pancreatic. Cancer, Sarah replied. It's not good, but his mind is sharp as ever. They stopped outside room 7112. The door was closed, and a small whiteboard next to it read, Carter, J., with the date and the name of his primary nurse. He might be sleeping, Sarah warned, and if he is, we should let him rest. She knocked gently on the door. When there was no answer, she opened it just a crack and peeked inside. Mr. Carter? You have a visitor. A gruff voice answered. I told you. No visitors. I think you'll want to see this one, Sarah said, opening the door wider so Michael could step in. The room was dimly lit, with the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. A hospital bed was positioned near the window, and in it sat a thin man with a wisp of white hair. He wore glasses and had an IV line connected to his arm. A muted basketball game played on the small TV mounted on the wall. For a moment, the man didn't look up from the book in his lap. When he finally did, his eyes widened just slightly before his face settled back into a neutral expression. Well, he said, his voice exactly as Michael remembered it from the radio. Look who finally decided to listen. Sarah slipped out quietly, closing the door behind her, leaving Michael Jordan face to face with his most persistent critic. Sarah slipped out quietly, closing the door behind her, leaving Michael Jordan face to face with his most persistent critic. For a moment, neither man spoke. Michael studied Carter, taking in his frail frame and the medical equipment surrounding him. Despite his condition, Carter's eyes were sharp and alert, studying Michael right back with the same intensity. You got my letter, Carter finally said. It wasn't a question. Michael nodded, pulling the folded paper from his pocket. Didn't expect fan mail to be quite so. He searched for the right word. Honest. A small smile tugged at the corner of Carter's mouth. I've never been your fan, Mr. Jordan. I've been your critic. There's a difference. Michael moved to the chair beside the bed, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Up close, he could see that Carter was older than he'd imagined, probably in his 70s, with deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. You're the voice from the Chicago sports radio show, Michael said. Coach Carter. You remembered. There was a hint of surprise in Carter's voice. Hard to forget the only person in Chicago who thought I needed improvement during the championship runs. Carter adjusted himself in the bed, wincing slightly. Everyone needs improvement. Even the great Michael Jordan. The familiar criticism should have annoyed him, but instead, Michael found himself chuckling. You know, most people would be excited to meet me, ask for an autograph, tell me about their favorite game. I'm not most people, Carter replied simply. And you didn't come all this way for another fan to tell you how wonderful you are. You came because I told you the truth. Michael leaned forward, curious now. And what truth is that? That you're failing as an owner in the same ways you never would have tolerated as a player. Carter gestured to the muted TV, where, ironically, a Hornets highlight was playing. Your team lacks identity. You draft on potential rather than skill. Your coaches are afraid to challenge the players. And worst of all, he fixed Michael with a stern look. You accept losing. The words stung, but Michael didn't flinch. You've been watching closely. Every game. Carter pointed to a stack of notebooks on his bedside table. I take notes, old habit. Michael reached for one of the notebooks, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Carter nodded permission. Opening the notebook, Michael found detailed observations about Hornets games, player movements, coaching decisions, statistical patterns, all written in the same neat handwriting as the letter. The analysis was surprisingly sophisticated. You've got LaMelo playing off-ball too much, Carter said, watching Michael flip through the pages. Kid's a natural playmaker, but your coach has him standing in the corner half the time. Michael raised an eyebrow. He'd had the same thought last week. And that center you drafted last year? He needs to drop an extra 15 pounds and work on his footwork. All the height in the world won't help if he can't stay in front of his man. Michael closed the notebook, a strange feeling settling over him. For years as a player, he'd listened to analysts and commentators break down his game, rarely hearing anything insightful. Yet here was a man in a hospital bed who saw the game exactly as he did. How did you end up in Charlotte? Michael asked. Last I knew, you were calling into Chicago radio stations. Carter's face clouded briefly. I moved around, followed the game, followed the jobs, ended up here teaching high school basketball until... He gestured to his frail body. Until this happened. And you've been watching the Hornets. Not much else to do in here. Carter pointed to the IV stand. Can't get out to games anymore, but I watch. And what I see isn't worthy of your name on the ownership papers. Most people would have been fired on the spot for talking to Michael Jordan this way. But in this quiet hospital room, the usual rules didn't seem to apply. You're right, Michael admitted, surprising himself with the words. We're underperforming. I know it. But knowing and fixing are different things. Carter's eyes lit up at the challenge. Your first problem is that point guard situation. You're starting the veteran when the rookie has better court vision. Politics. Over performance. Thompson has been loyal to the organization, Michael countered. He's a leader in the locker room. Leadership doesn't win games if you can't see the open man, Carter shot back. You, of all people, should know that. How many times did you get frustrated when your teammates couldn't make the right pass? Michael couldn't help but smile. Carter had him there. Their conversation flowed into a detailed discussion of the Hornets roster, playing rotations and development strategy. Carter didn't hold back, challenging Michael's decisions and offering alternatives that, surprisingly often, aligned with thoughts Michael had considered but never implemented. Why do you care so much? Michael finally asked during a pause in their basketball talk. About me? About the Hornets? Carter was quiet for a moment, looking down at his thin hands. Basketball is pure when it's played right. It's beautiful. When I see talent wasted, whether it's a player not reaching their potential or an owner not building a proper team, it bothers me. He looked up at Michael, his eyes suddenly intense. You changed the game as a player. You could change it again, as an owner, but you're playing it safe. The Michael Jordan I watched would never play it safe. The words hung in the air between them. Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the desire to prove someone wrong, to rise to a challenge. Soft knock interrupted them. Sarah peeked her head in. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter needs to rest now. Doctor's orders. Michael stood, surprised to see that over an hour had passed. I'll let you get some rest. Carter nodded, suddenly looking tired. The conversation seemed to have taken a toll on him. You've got my thoughts. Do what you want with them. Michael hesitated at the door. Would it be all right if I came back? Maybe later this week? Carter raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the request. You want to come back? You've got good insights, Michael said simply. And I've got questions. A hint of a smile crossed Carter's face. Bring game tape next time. That center's footwork is fixable with the right drills. As Michael left the hospital, he felt lighter, somehow. The letter that had bothered him yesterday now felt like an opportunity. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. Tracy, I need you to clear my schedule for Thursday afternoon and get me the full game tapes from the last 5 Hornets games. Is everything okay, Mr. Jordan? Tracy asked, surprise evident in her voice. Michael looked back at the hospital building, a smile forming. Yeah, I think it might be. I've got a new coach to consult with. Michael looked back at the hospital building, a smile forming. Yeah, I think it might be. I've got a new coach to consult with. True to his word, Michael returned to Memorial Hospital 3 days later. This time, he brought a laptop loaded with game footage and scouting reports. Carter was sitting up in bed when Michael arrived, looking slightly better than during their first meeting. The TV was playing a college basketball game with the volume low. You actually came back, Carter said, sounding genuinely surprised. Michael set his laptop on the movable table beside Carter's bed. I said I would. Most people say a lot of things, Carter replied, his eyes fixed on Michael's face as if searching for something. Especially famous people. Michael pulled up a chair. I'm not most people either. That earned him a small smile from Carter. Fair enough. They spent the next hour reviewing game footage, with Carter pointing out details that even Michael's professional scouts had missed. A defensive rotation that consistently broke down, a play that worked in the first quarter but was easily countered after halftime, a bench player showing unexpected potential in limited minutes. Your coaching staff is too careful around you, Carter said, as they finished watching the 4th game. They show you what they think you want to see, not what you need to see, Michael frowned. What makes you say that? These reports? Carter tapped the printed scouting documents Michael had brought. They're full of praise for your draft picks, even the ones underperforming. No one wants to tell the boss his choices aren't working out. The observation hit home. Michael had sensed something similar in recent meetings, but hadn't been able to put his finger on it. So what would you do differently? Michael asked. Carter leaned back against his pillows, suddenly looking tired. If I were in your shoes? That's why I'm here. Carter took a deep breath. I'd give you 3 steps to fix the Hornets, but you won't like them. Try me. First, change your draft strategy completely. Stop chasing athletic freaks and start finding basketball players, kids who understand the game, not just those who can jump out of the gym. Michael nodded. He'd been thinking along similar lines lately. Second, restructure your coaching staff. Your head coach is fine, but he needs assistants who aren't afraid to challenge him. And you. And third, Michael asked. Carter fixed him with a steady gaze. Spend less time on your business empire and more time with the team. Players perform differently when they know the owner is watching. It's human nature. The third point stung. Michael had been delegating more and more team operations to focus on his other businesses. That's quite a challenge, Michael said finally. Well, you've got 1 season to turn things around, Carter replied. I won't be here for the one after that. The blunt acknowledgement of his condition hung in the air between them. Michael didn't know how to respond. Carter saved him from having to. So, are you up for it? 1 season to prove Michael Jordan, the owner, can be as great as Michael Jordan. The player? There it was, the challenge laid bare. Michael felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt since his playing days. The need to prove himself. "One condition," Michael said. "You work with me on this. Weekly meetings, just like this. You tell me what you see, no filter. I'm stuck in this bed, Jordan. Not exactly in a position to attend practices. We'll bring the team to you when possible. Game footage, scouting reports, draft profiles, everything. I want your eyes on it." Carter studied him, perhaps looking for signs that Michael wasn't serious. Finding none, he slowly nodded. "Deal. But I won't go easy on you because you're Michael Jordan." Michael actually laughed at that. "I think that's been established." As their meeting wound down, a question that had been nagging at Michael finally surfaced. "Why were you always so critical of me? Even back in Chicago, when I was winning championships?" Carter was quiet for a long moment. "Because greatness without growth is just showing off. You were capable of more than just scoring titles and highlight reels. You were capable of perfection. No one's perfect," Michael said. "No," Carter agreed, "but you came closer than anyone I've ever seen. And it wasn't your talent that got you there. It was your response to criticism, your ability to turn every slight into fuel." As Michael packed up his laptop, Carter added, "I wasn't criticizing to tear you down. I was pushing because I saw what you could be." Michael paused at the door on his way out. "I'm coming back next Tuesday. Have your notes ready." Carter nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Bring that center with you. I want to show him some footwork drills. He's a professional athlete. You think he'll listen to a man in a hospital bed?" Carter's smile grew. "If you tell him to, he will. That's the power you have, Jordan. It's time you used it right." As Michael walked back to his car, he pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, schedules to change, and a team to rebuild. For the first time in years, Michael Jordan felt the familiar fire of competition burning inside him. Game on. As Michael walked back to his car, he pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, schedules to change, and a team to rebuild. For the first time in years, Michael Jordan felt the familiar fire of competition burning inside him. Game on. The next week, Michael arrived at the hospital with a thick folder of player statistics and 3 game tapes. He found Carter sitting up in bed, looking through a basketball magazine. "Right on time," Carter said, setting the magazine aside. "I was just reading about your Hornets. The experts are predicting another losing season." Michael placed the folder on Carter's tray table. "Then, the experts don't know what's coming." Over the next 2 hours, they broke down player performance metrics and game strategies. Carter's insights were sharp, catching details that even the Hornets' professional coaches had missed. "This rookie you've got coming off the bench," Carter said, tapping a photo of a young guard. "His scoring is average, but look at how the team's defense improves when he's on the floor. He's communicating, getting everyone in position." Michael nodded. He'd noticed the kid's work ethic but hadn't seen the defensive impact. "I'll have coach give him more minutes next game." And so the pattern was set. Each week, Michael would visit Carter, bringing new game footage, statistics, and increasingly, questions about specific players or strategies. Carter never disappointed, offering clear, direct feedback that cut through the politics and egos of professional basketball. After 3 weeks, Michael noticed something surprising. He was looking forward to these hospital visits more than board meetings or even games. There was something refreshing about Carter's honesty, his focus solely on the game itself rather than the business around it. During one visit, Michael brought along the Hornets head coach, James Williams. The coach was skeptical at first, arms crossed as Carter critiqued his rotation patterns. "With all due respect, sir," Coach Williams said stiffly, I've been coaching professional basketball for 15 years. Carter wasn't intimidated. And you've never made it past the second round of the playoffs. Maybe it's time to try something new. Michael held his breath, waiting for the coach to storm out. Instead, after a tense moment, Williams leaned forward. What exactly did you have in mind? By the end of that session, Coach Williams was taking notes and asking questions. As they left the hospital, the coach turned to Michael. Where did you find this guy? He sees things most people don't. He found me, Michael replied simply. As weeks turned into months, the Hornets began to change. Michael implemented Carter's suggestions one by one. The rookie guard got more playing time. The center with footwork issues spent extra hours with the assistants. The team's offensive schemes were simplified but executed with greater precision. And slowly, the Hornets started winning more games. The change didn't go unnoticed. Sports commentators speculated about the team's improvement. Something's different about Jordan's approach this season, one ESPN analyst said during a pregame show. He's more involved, more hands-on with the team than we've seen before. What no one outside knew was that Michael now spent every Tuesday afternoon in room 7112 at Memorial Hospital, reviewing game tape with a man most basketball fans had never heard of. Carter had good days and bad days. Sometimes Michael would arrive to find him sleeping, the toll of his cancer treatments evident in his thin face and labored breathing. On those days, Michael would simply sit quietly, working through game plans while Carter rested. On one particularly good day, Michael brought a surprise guest, LaMelo Ball, the Hornets' young star point guard. So, you're the secret coach MJ keeps talking about, LaMelo said, extending his hand to Carter. Carter studied the young player with a critical eye. You're still forcing too many fancy passes when the simple one would do. LaMelo looked startled, then broke into a grin. MJ said you wouldn't sugarcoat it. Sugar's bad for you, Carter replied. So is sloppy basketball. For the next hour, Carter broke down film of LaMelo's recent games, pointing out missed opportunities and defensive lapses. Instead of being offended, the young star asked questions and took notes. As they were leaving, LaMelo asked Michael, "Can I come back next week? I want to work on those pick-and-roll reads he mentioned." Michael smiled, nodding. "If Coach Carter's up for it." The nickname stuck. Soon, a small group of Hornets players began making regular visits to room 7112. They called it Carter's classroom. And though they kept it quiet from the media, word spread through the team that if you wanted to improve your game, you needed to face the toughest critic in Charlotte. After one session with the team's starting five, Michael stayed behind to help Carter back into bed. The session had clearly tired him, but there was a light in his eyes Michael hadn't seen before. "They're starting to get it," Carter said softly. "They're playing for each other now, not just themselves." Michael nodded. "The team's different. The whole organization feels different." "And how about you?" Carter asked. "How are you different?" Michael considered the question as he adjusted Carter's pillows. 6 months ago, he'd been going through the motions as an owner, treating the team like just another business investment. Now he felt connected again to the game he loved. "I remember now," Michael said simply. "Remember what?" "Why basketball matters." "Remember what?" "Why basketball matters," Carter nodded, a look of satisfaction crossing his tired face. He closed his eyes for a moment, and Michael thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "I don't have much time left, Jordan." The blunt statement hung in the air. Michael had known this, of course, but hearing Carter say it so directly made his chest tighten. The doctors gave me 3 months. That was 5 months ago. Carter opened his eyes, meeting Michael's gaze directly. I'm on borrowed time. Michael didn't know what to say. In his career, he'd faced every kind of challenge. Tough defenders, championship pressure, media scrutiny. But this was different. There was no game plan for this conversation. I want to see this through, Carter continued. But we need to be realistic. I won't be here to see next season. Michael pulled his chair closer to the bed. What do you need from me? Not from you. For you! Carter shifted, wincing slightly as he reached for the notebook on his bedside table. I've been working on something. He handed Michael a worn leather notebook, different from the ones they'd been using for game analysis. This one was older, the pages yellowed with age. Open it, Carter instructed. Inside, Michael found detailed notes and diagrams spanning years. Basketball, strategies, player development plans, organizational structures. On the first page was a title, Building a Championship Culture, a 3-year plan. I started this years ago, Carter explained. Been adding to it, refining it. It's how I would build a team if I had the chance. He gestured weakly toward Michael. Now I'm giving it to you. Michael carefully turned the pages, scanning the detailed contents. It wasn't just about basketball tactics. It covered everything from scouting approaches to practice structures to leadership philosophy. Michael searched for the right word. This is comprehensive. It's my life's work, Carter said simply. Basketball as it should be played and taught. The weight of what Carter was sharing hit Michael. This wasn't just advice. It was a legacy. I'd like to implement this, Michael said, closing the notebook carefully. But I need your help to understand it fully. Carter's face brightened slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next few weeks, their sessions took on a new urgency. Despite his declining health, Carter insisted on walking Michael through every aspect of his plan. They were no longer just fixing immediate issues with the Hornets. They were laying groundwork for years to come. As Carter's strength waned, he was moved to hospice care within the hospital. The room was more comfortable, with space for visitors to sit and stay longer. Michael arranged his schedule to visit almost daily now, often bringing his laptop and doing Hornets business from Carter's room. You don't have to babysit me, Carter grumbled one afternoon. I'm not, Michael replied without looking up from his computer. I just work better here. Fewer people interrupting me with nonsense. It was partly true. There was something about Carter's space that helped Michael focus on what mattered. One day, Michael arrived with a large box and a grin he couldn't suppress. What's that look for? Carter asked suspiciously. Got something for you. Michael opened the box and pulled out a custom Charlotte Hornets jersey. He held it up, revealing the name on the back, Coach Carter. For once, Carter seemed genuinely surprised. He reached out, running his fingers over the letters. Official team gear, Michael explained. You're part of the organization now, whether you like it or not. Carter didn't speak for a moment, and Michael worried he'd somehow offended him. But then he noticed Carter blinking rapidly, his eyes suspiciously moist. Thank you, Carter said, gruffly, clearing his throat. The jersey was carefully hung on the wall where Carter could see it from his bed. The next day, Michael brought a bigger surprise. 3 Hornets players who wanted Carter's advice on specific aspects of their game. The young center had questions about post moves. A shooting guard wanted help with his defensive positioning. The rookie point guard needed guidance on reading defenses. Carter sat up straighter than Michael had seen in weeks, his voice growing stronger as he broke down techniques and strategies. He didn't coddle the players or waste time with pleasantries. His feedback was direct, specific, and exactly what they needed to hear. When the center struggled to understand a footwork concept, Carter surprised everyone by slowly getting out of bed, despite the nurse's protests. "Watch my feet," he said, demonstrating a pivot move with careful, deliberate steps. His body was frail, but his movements were precise, the muscle memory of thousands of hours of basketball still present. The greedy young player's eyes widened with understanding. "I see it now." By the time the players left, promising to return with practice footage, Carter was exhausted. As the nurse helped him back to bed, Michael noticed how much the short demonstration had taken out of him. "You didn't have to get up," Michael said softly after the nurse had gone. "Yes, I did," Carter replied. "Some things you can't explain with words. You have to show them." Michael nodded, understanding completely. It was how he had learned too, not just from coach's words, but from seeing the movements, feeling them, in his own body. "Those kids have potential," Carter said, his voice growing sleepy. "Especially the center. He reminds me of a young Hakeem Olajuwon before he was polished." "High praise coming from you," Michael remarked. "Not praise. Expectation," Carter corrected. "He's nowhere near that level yet, but he could be. They all could be better than they are now." As Carter drifted to sleep, Michael stayed, reviewing the 3-year plan they'd been refining together. The first phase was already in progress, changing the team culture, establishing new expectations, identifying the right pieces for the future. Michael looked up at the sleeping figure in the bed, then back at the notebook filled with Carter's lifetime of basketball wisdom. He made a silent promise to himself and to Carter that this plan wouldn't just sit on a shelf. It would be implemented step by step, detail by detail. Not just because it was good basketball strategy, but because it mattered to the man who had changed the way Michael saw the game and himself all over again. Not just because it was good basketball strategy, but because it mattered to the man who had changed the way Michael saw the game and himself all over again. 2 weeks. Later, the Hornets faced the Philadelphia 76ers in a crucial mid-season game. At the hospital, Carter watched on his small TV while Michael sat beside him. Both men tense as the final quarter began with the Hornets down by 7 points. "They're rushing their offense," Carter observed, as another Hornets shot clanked off the rim. Michael nodded. "Coach will settle them down during this timeout." Sure enough, after the break, the Hornets emerged with newfound patience. They worked the ball inside, made the extra pass, and tightened their defense. Slowly, they chipped away at Philadelphia's weak lead. With 30 seconds left, the Hornets' young center, the same one Carter had been tutoring, caught the ball in the post. Instead of forcing a shot, as he might have done months ago, he pivoted smoothly, using the exact footwork Carter had demonstrated, and passed to an open teammate for the game-winning three-pointer. Carter slapped his bed in triumph. "That's it. That's exactly what we worked on." Michael grinned. "Looks like your teaching stuck." "Damn right it did." As the final buzzer sounded, the Hornets players celebrated their 3rd straight victory. At home, fans were starting to fill the arena again, energized by the team's new playing style and improved results. After the game, Michael's phone rang. It was Coach Williams. "Great adjustments in the 4th quarter," Michael said by way of a greeting. "That's why I'm calling," Williams replied. "Those weren't my adjustments. The players kept saying they needed to do it like Coach Carter showed us. They took over the huddle." Michael glanced at Carter, who was replaying the game's final minutes, a satisfied smile on his face. "They're learning," Michael said. "That's what matters." The winning continued. 5 games. 7 games. The national media began to take notice of the Hornets' transformation. "This team is playing with a different energy," one ESPN analyst commented. Jordan has finally found a winning formula in Charlotte. What no one outside knew was that after each game, win or lose, Michael would call Carter first for his analysis. Despite his weakening condition, Carter's basketball mind remained razor-sharp. He could recall specific plays in detail, offering insights that the coaching staff would incorporate into the next game plan. The secret weapon, Michael called him during one of their daily visits. Carter scoffed. "I'm just telling you what I see. Nothing secret about paying attention." But they both knew it was more than that. Carter saw patterns others missed, weaknesses others overlooked, and potential others underestimated. As the Hornets' winning streak reached 9 games, Carter's health took another downturn. He began sleeping more, his energy fading noticeably. The doctors spoke to Michael quietly in the hallway, using terms like palliative care and comfort measures. Still, Carter insisted on watching every game. On days when staying awake was too difficult, he would ask Michael to record their sessions so he could listen when he had the strength. "I should be at tonight's game," Michael said one afternoon, checking his watch. "It's an important one against Boston." "So go," Carter said weakly. Michael hesitated. The Hornets were now fighting for playoff position, something unthinkable just months ago. As owner, he should be there. "The team knows what to do," Carter assured him. "You've built something that can run without you hovering over it every minute." Michael recognized his own advice being reflected back at him. He'd said similar words to Carter just last week about trusting the players to make the right decisions in the moment. "I'd rather watch it here," Michael decided. "Better company." Carter's thin face broke into a smile. "Your call, but I might fall asleep before halftime." "Then I'll tell you how it ends." An idea had been forming in Michael's mind for several days. That evening, while Carter dozed between quarters, he made some calls, arranging something special. 3 days later, Michael arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, bringing with him a wheelchair and a team of nurses. "What's all this?" Carter asked suspiciously. "You've been coaching from your hospital bed for months," Michael explained. "Tonight you're coming to the game." Carter's eyes widened. "The doctors won't. Already cleared it. I've got a medical team standing by, and we've arranged a private suite at the arena. No crowds, no germs, just you watching the game live." For a moment, Carter seemed overwhelmed. Then he straightened his shoulders as much as his frail body would allow. "Well, what are we waiting for? I need to see their defensive rotations up close." The journey to the arena was carefully managed. Carter was wheeled directly to a private elevator and up to a suite Michael had specially prepared. Medical equipment was discreetly arranged, and the room was set up so Carter could see every inch of the court. The Hornets played their best game of the season that night. Perhaps inspired by the knowledge that Coach Carter was watching in person, the team executed with precision Michael hadn't seen since his Bulls days. In the final minute, with victory assured, LaMelo Ball glanced up toward the private suite and pointed. One by one, other players followed suit, until the entire team was acknowledging the frail man watching from above. The gesture made headlines the next day. Hornets' mysterious tribute. Who were players pointing to during win? Michael kept the secret, but he made sure Carter saw the news stories. The old coach just shook his head, but Michael caught the proud smile he tried to hide. "Not bad for a bunch of kids we were ready to give up on a few months ago," Carter said quietly, as Michael wheeled him back to his room at the hospital. "Not bad at all," Michael agreed. "Not bad at all." "Not bad at all," Michael agreed. "Not bad at all." 1 week after the game, Michael arrived at the hospital to find a team of doctors outside Carter's room. Their serious expressions told him everything before a word was spoken. "Mr. Jordan," the lead doctor said quietly, "we need to talk about Mr. Carter's condition." Michael nodded. following them to a small consultation room. "The cancer has spread significantly," the doctor explained, showing Michael scans with areas highlighted in ominous colors. "He's declined much faster than we anticipated in the last 48 hours. "How long?" Michael asked, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "Days. Maybe a week." The doctor placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. "He's been asking for you. He seems to have something important to discuss." Michael thanked the doctors and took a moment to compose himself before entering Carter's room. The change from just 2 days ago was striking. Carter's face was gaunt, his breathing labored, but his eyes, those sharp, observant eyes, still focused clearly when Michael entered. "Took you long enough," Carter said, his voice weaker, but still carrying that familiar edge. Michael pulled up his usual chair. "Traffic," he lied, not wanting to reveal he'd spent 20 minutes in his car, preparing for this conversation. Carter wasn't fooled. "They told you, didn't they? About the timeline?" Michael nodded, not seeing any point in pretense. "They did." "Good. Means we can skip the small talk." Carter shifted slightly, wincing with the effort. "I need to tell you something important." For the next hour, Carter spoke more about himself than he had in all their previous meetings combined. He told Michael about his early days as a promising young coach at a small college in Illinois, about the career-ending accident that left him with chronic pain and forced him out of coaching just as he was gaining recognition. "Couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore," Carter explained. "But I couldn't leave the game either, so I found other ways to stay connected." He revealed how he'd worked as a scout, a radio commentator, and eventually a high school coach before his health forced him to retire completely. "I was bitter for a long time," Carter admitted, "watching others achieve what I couldn't. It would have been easy to give up on basketball." "But you didn't," Michael observed. "No, instead, I studied the game more deeply. Without the pressure of wins and losses, I could see patterns more clearly. I started writing to coaches, players, even owners, telling them what they were missing." "And did they listen?" Carter's laugh turned into a cough. "Almost never. Most people don't want real feedback, Jordan. They want confirmation that what they're already doing is right." Michael thought about the letter that had brought him to this hospital room months ago. "But you kept trying anyway." "I did." Carter's eyes took on a distant look. "I've written thousands of letters over the years. Detailed analysis, suggestions, observations, sent them to teams across the league. Did anyone ever respond?" "A few assistant coaches. One general manager who implemented some defensive schemes I suggested." Carter's lips curved into a small smile. "And now you." Michael leaned forward, suddenly curious. "Why me? You've been watching the Hornets for years. Why write that letter when you did?" Carter was quiet for a moment. "Because I was running out of time, and you were running out of excuses. You had the resources, the name, the power to build something special. But you weren't using them right." He fixed Michael with a penetrating stare. "And because I've been writing to you for much longer than you know." "What do you mean?" Carter gestured weakly toward the small closet in his room. "Bottom drawer, blue folder." Michael retrieved the folder and opened it to find dozens of letters, all addressed to him at various points in his career, from his early days with the Bulls through his time as Hornets owner. Each was filled with detailed observations and suggestions, just like the one that had finally reached him. "You wrote all these?" Michael asked, paging through letters dated years apart. "Whenever I saw something you could improve." Carter's voice was growing fainter. "Never sent most of them. Figured a superstar like you would have them thrown away." Michael remembered the first letter, the one that had brought him here. So why start sending them now? Told you. Running out of time. Carter closed his eyes briefly. And I finally had something worth saying. Michael sat with the revelation, turning it over in his mind. For decades, this man had been analyzing his game, his career, his decisions, seeing both his greatness and his flaws with equal clarity. "I need you to promise me something," Carter said suddenly, his eyes opening with renewed intensity. "Name it." "Find people who will tell you the truth. Not yes men, not fans, people who see the game clearly and aren't afraid to challenge you." Carter reached for Michael's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Your position, your fame, they isolate you from honest feedback. Fight against that, or you'll never build what you're capable of building." Michael nodded solemnly. "I promise." "And finish what we started with the Hornets. The 3-year plan. All of it." "I will." Carter seemed satisfied with these answers. He relaxed back against his pillows, fatigue evident in every line of his face. "You should rest," Michael said, rising from his chair. "Plenty of time for that soon," Carter replied with grim humor. "Sit. There's one more thing I want to tell. You?" Michael sat back down, giving Carter his full attention. "Your greatest gift as a player wasn't your athleticism," Carter said thoughtfully. "Everyone talks about the dunks, the hang time, but that's not what made you special." Michael raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this assessment. "Your greatest gift was your ability to be coached," Carter continued, "to take criticism and turn it into improvement. Phil Jackson could push you because you allowed yourself to be pushed." Michael had never thought of it that way before. Throughout his career, commentators had focused on his physical abilities, his competitive fire, but rarely this particular quality. As an owner, you need to create an environment where everyone, from stars to bench players, can be coached like that, where feedback is valued, not feared. It was a perspective that tied together everything they'd been working on these past months. Not just plays and personnel decisions, but the fundamental culture of a basketball organization. "That's the final piece," Carter said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "Create that culture, and championships will follow." They sat in comfortable silence after that, both men contemplating the journey they'd shared. Outside the window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. When Carter spoke again, his voice was so faint, Michael had to lean in to hear him. "Been a good run, hasn't it?" Carter asked. Michael felt unexpected emotion rising in his throat. This gruff, demanding man had become something he hadn't expected. A friend, a mentor, a connection to the pure love of basketball he'd sometimes lost in the business of the sport. "The best," Michael agreed simply. Carter's eyes were growing, heavy, the medication and exhaustion taking their toll. "Next time," he murmured, "bring that new draft prospect you've been talking about. The one with the raw talent but poor fundamentals." Michael nodded, though they both knew there wouldn't be a next time. Still, he played along. "He needs work on his defensive awareness." "Don't they all?" Carter said, his eyes finally closing. "Don't they all?" As Carter drifted to sleep, Michael remained in his chair. He thought about leaving. There were calls to make, meetings scheduled, a team to run, but something kept him there, watching over the man who had changed the course of the Hornets and, in many ways, his own approach to basketball leadership. Some lessons, Michael realized, were worth being present for until the very end. Some lessons, Michael realized, were worth being present for until the very end. 3 days later, James Carter passed away peacefully in his sleep. Michael had been there just hours before, reviewing game film with him even as Carter drifted in and out of consciousness. The nurses said it was the most alert they'd seen him in days. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn morning. Michael had expected a small gathering, but he was still surprised by how few people attended. A handful of former students, some hospital staff, and a couple of elderly men who introduced themselves as old coaching colleagues. He outlived most of his friends and family, one of them explained to Michael. Basketball was his real family. Anyway, when it came time for eulogies, Michael approached the podium. He'd spoken at many events in his life, but this felt different, more important somehow. Most of you know me as Michael Jordan, basketball player and owner, he began, but today I'm here as a student of James Carter. Michael shared the story of their unlikely friendship, careful to honor Carter's privacy, while conveying the impact he'd had on the Hornets organization and on Michael personally. In basketball, we talk a lot about coaches who push us to greatness. We celebrate the Phil Jacksons and the Pat Rileys, but sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones working in the shadows, demanding excellence without seeking credit. Michael looked around at the small gathering. James understood something many of us forget: that honest criticism is the greatest gift you can give someone with potential. He never sugar-coated anything, never held back to spare feelings or avoid conflict. He simply told the truth as he saw it. Toward the end of his eulogy, Michael made an announcement. Today, the Charlotte Hornets are establishing the Coach Carter Scholarship for basketball analysis and coaching development. Each year, we will identify young people who show Carter's gift for seeing the game clearly and his courage in speaking uncomfortable truths. There was a quiet murmur of appreciation from the small crowd. Because basketball isn't just about who jumps highest or scores most, Michael continued. It's about understanding the game's deepest patterns and having the integrity to pursue excellence even when no one is watching. He paused, feeling a tightness in his throat. That was James Carter's gift to the game. And to me. After the service, Michael stayed behind as others departed. He stood alone by the fresh grave, hands in his pockets, memories washing over him. "I'll keep my promise," he said quietly to the headstone bearing Carter's name. The team, the plan, all of it. 1 year later, the Charlotte Hornets entered the IFIBU NBA playoffs for the first time in years. The team that had once been an afterthought in the league was now known for its disciplined play, innovative strategies, and player development. In his owner's box, Michael watched with pride as his team executed the systems and principles laid out in Carter's 3-year plan. Beside him sat an empty chair, a small tribute few would understand. After the Hornets won their first playoff series, Michael made a quiet trip to the cemetery. There were fresh flowers on Carter's grave. Hospital staff and players still visited. Occasionally, carrying on the connection Carter had formed in his final months, Michael sat on a bench near the headstone, speaking aloud as if Carter could hear him. "We did it, Coach. First playoff series win. The center you worked with just made all-defensive team, and that rookie point guard is now starting. Everything's on track, just like you said it would be." The 3-year plan was unfolding exactly as Carter had outlined. The basketball world was taking notice, with analysts puzzled by how Michael Jordan had suddenly become one of the league's most savvy owners after years of questionable decisions. If only they knew, Michael thought with a smile. After leaving the cemetery, Michael drove to a small apartment building across town. The hospital had contacted him after Carter's death. Someone needed to clear out his modest apartment, and there was no family to do it. Michael had kept everything, unable to part with Carter's basketball books, notes, and memorabilia. Today, he had come to sort through the last box of personal items he'd been avoiding. Inside were more letters, hundreds of them, addressed to coaches, top players and executives across basketball. Some sent, most unsent, all filled with the same keen insights and direct feedback that had characterized Carter's communication. At the bottom of the box, Michael found an old photograph and a sealed envelope with his name on it. The photo showed a high school basketball team from the early 1980s. As Michael examined it more closely, he felt his heart skip a beat. There in the front row sat a young Michael Jordan, gangly and not yet grown into his body. And standing behind him, hand on his shoulder, was a much younger James Carter. With shaking hands, Michael opened the envelope. "Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally found this photo. Yes, that's me, your JV basketball coach for the Three. Months before my accident. You wouldn't remember me. I was just passing through your life then. A young coach with big dreams before a car accident ended my sideline career. But I never forgot you. Even then, I could see what you could become if you directed that raw talent properly. When you hit the big time, I followed your career, noting what you could improve even as you amazed the world. I never mentioned our brief connection because I wanted you to listen to my advice based on its merit, not some sentimental connection to your past. The game deserves that kind of honesty. You've given me a gift these past months, the chance to coach again through you, to see my basketball ideas implemented at the highest level. Thank you for that. Take care of our team. They're on the right path now. Coach Carter." Michael sat stunned, the photo in one hand and the letter in the other. Memories flooded back. A demanding JV coach who had pushed him harder than the varsity coach, who had mysteriously disappeared mid-season after some kind of accident. He'd been so young, so focused on his own journey, he'd barely registered the man's name. Yet Carter had followed his entire career, watching from afar, analyzing his game, preparing those letters filled with insights and suggestions that might have changed his game even earlier if he'd received them. His biggest critic had actually been his earliest believer. Michael carefully placed the championship ring he'd brought with him on top of the letter, a final tribute to the man who had taught him that greatness requires not just talent, but the courage to hear the truth and the wisdom to act on it. Coach Carter had been right all along. The greatest lessons in basketball and in life often come from the most unexpected sources. If this story of Michael Jordan and Coach Carter touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments section below, and let our community know which part of the story resonated with you the most. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories just like this one. Your support helps us continue sharing these emotional journeys that remind us of the power of unexpected connections and second chances. For another moving story that captures the magic of mentorship and personal growth, click the video appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for being part of our community. We'll see you in the next video.